Welcome to Create and Flow, the podcast that helps you get you out of your own head, be curious, and live a fulfilling life. This episode is another special episode where me and Will be diving deep into the lessons we learned from the samurai culture and their code of conduct. And we will be adding in some listener Q&A sessions in between, so be aware of that. And you can also use the timestamps we provide to jump around. And thank you from the bottom of our hearts for those of you who send questions. We really do appreciate it. Hope you all enjoy.
The date is November 6th, 2021. We're here again. I'm Will, and this is David Hong. Oh, well, Akana and David Hong. And David, what are we going to be talking about today?
Today, we'll be talking about samurais, Musashi Miyamoto, the books that he's written, and we will be nerding out on that. And to make it very relevant to the listeners, to make it very practical, we will be just kind of going over the lessons we've learned from it and kind of like common themes that we feel like other people can take away from listening to this podcast.
Right, because there are a lot of like Stoicism, for instance. It's making a reemergence. These sort of codes, these honor codes from the past, they're sort of bringing people are sort of bringing it back and looking at the past as guidelines for behavior, for work ethic, for efficiency, for relationships. So I think you and we share a deep appreciation for Bushido, that is the samurai code of values when it comes to like honor and self-conduct. And this all ties in with, I think, this emerging interest of self-development today. So a lot of our listeners will find it very valuable.
I think we can dive in straight into one of the Q&A questions because it kind of has a good launching off point. And one of the question, it comes from Alec Jira, and he asks us, to what extent do you agree with the philosophy of Bushido? And I think I can start off with this one. So with my understanding of Bushido, it's kind of these 8 virtues or like commandments that samurais, they kind of just go over and try to live their life by. The first one is rectitude or justice. Number 2 is courage. Number 3 is benevolence or mercy. Number 4 is politeness. Number 5 is honesty and sincerity. Number 6 is honor. Number 7 is loyalty. Number 8 is character and self control. I think anyone who kind of reads that, they'll be like, oh, duh, like that's all very good. Like who would go against it? And I somewhat agree with that. I feel like if I were to choose what would be my favorite or my bias, it would probably be the one on courage, because I feel like that is the building block of any other virtue. And it's kind of expressed in other philosophies like Stoicism as well. Like Stoicism, it has 4 main virtues: courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice, I believe. And it all starts with courage. If you don't have courage, you can't lead into the other virtues. So that's kind of just my initial thoughts on it. Will, you want to kind of expand from there and share your thoughts?
So the interesting thing about Bushido is when we say Bushido, we're talking about how it's an honor like code of it's an honor code for samurai. However, similarly to the medieval chivalrous knights, there's a code of chivalry. The concept of Bushido and chivalry has actually been sort of uh, academically created because there wasn't actually a strict code back in the day, but we can actually still look at these 8 virtues of Bushido and look at generally what the samurai held in high court. I agree that courage is definitely useful in creating any kind of foundation for any virtue. Actually, David has a weekly newsletter, as some of you know, and he talks about how without courage, you can't have any other virtue well practiced. But for what I'm going to say is, I look at Bushido not necessarily in terms of the specific virtues that have been academically created, but the general code of honor. That is. What attracts me to the samurai code of honor is that everything is basically life or death. It's being of the ultimate use and putting your life on the line for ideals you believe in, which is, I think, uh, in the day and age that we live in, it's very you don't really find that much often. There's a lot of hedonism and a lot of I'm just going with the flow, whatever the crowd believes, sort of attitude. And what attracts me to this code of honor is just putting your virtues, putting your ideals first before self gratification.
Thank you for giving me a shout out, Will. I love you for that.
Of course.
And secondly, I kind of want to go into the etymology of all this. So Bushido, do was it means way of, just the way of, like the path. So
Hmm.
any other Japanese words you encounter, you can kind of apply that in. So for example, Dokkodo is one of the books that Musashi Miyamoto wrote, and it literally means the way of the what do you call it? The way of walking alone, or way of independence.
Oh.
Similarly to shodo, I believe it's the way of writing. It's calligraphy. Taekwondo. It literally means the way of kicking and punching. Uh,
Ah, I see.
yeah. So anytime you see the word, or it has the word do at the end, so you can kind of guess like it means like the way of. So just kind of like a fun fact for that. And going into, I guess, the overarching lessons that kind of Bushido and like the samurai culture kind of brings. Will, do you have any kind of lessons that you feel like you can share with the listeners? Yeah, what you've learned from kind of like diving into more of the literature, and like the way these samurais conduct themselves, how they view life. Is there kind of practical takeaways that you implement in your own life and you want to share?
Sure. I think I was reading the book Hagakure, which is very famous for sort of outlining Bushido. And one of the stories that Hagakure purports, it's basically a collection of samurai sayings that from a multitude of literature in medieval Japan. And it's the idea that a servant, any man who puts his life in service for his master to the greatest extent, is worth more weight than the servant who is the most clever, the strongest, the most XYZ, who doesn't serve as much as he can. And that is your output, the fact that you're doing and trying something and getting results is worth so much more than anyone who's more clever, more stronger, more intelligent than you who isn't exercising those traits to the fullest of that potential. Does that make sense?
That potential of trying to serve.
Yeah, so say like you're a lord of this castle and you have, let's say, 11 servants, right? Um 10 of
That's
which
it.
you
Come on, I have more than
Okay,
that.
okay. Let's say 101. 100 of which are extremely clever, very strong, very smart, but one of which who is willing to live, die, and use all of his skills, even though that he's lacking in comparison with everyone else. He's using all of himself for you in service. Basically, what the proverb or the story is trying to say is that it doesn't matter how strong or clever you are, the person who is willing to do the work, even if they're extremely underskilled, they're worth so much more than anyone else when it comes to service.
Yep. Where can we find more of those people? Will we?
Well, I think it's helpful for me because a lot of us, especially in the age of information, we want to be the best. And we're constantly exposed to so many different people who are better than us in our fields. But the fact of the matter is, as long as you're trying and you're going out there, that 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 is worth the gold right there. The fact that you're going out there and doing it, because there's always going to be a bigger fish.
I love that. It's a different narrative. So, like you said, we are wired to compare ourselves with like, and it's so inevitable with social media. We are comparing ourselves every day. There's always gonna be someone who's better than us. But going back to that idea of like, okay, it's not about being better at that. I guess.
Right. It's like the difference between having 100 awesome YouTube video ideas and then the guy next door who doesn't have a lot of good ideas, but he's making content anyway. Um, and that's it's where success really lies in. It's the fact that you're willing to put yourself forward.
I'm reminded of the actual definition of samurai, and it's like it means to serve, like the one who serves,
Oh yeah,
right?
that's right.
That's from what I remember. Yeah, so it definitely goes along with that statement. I guess if I were to if take my shot in terms of like the lessons I've accumulated from just reading about Musashi Miyamoto, I feel like just embodying, well, like every people are gonna be different. So like every samurai, they're gonna, even though they follow the same rule of or code of conduct, they're not gonna, they might have different interpretations of it. So I'm right now I'm only seeing things through the lenses of Musashi Miyamoto. So I'm gonna be seeing things in a little bit of a rose-colored glasses, which I don't mind,
Sure.
because Musashi Miyamoto, he's kind of seen as the greatest samurai swordsman of all time.
Oh yeah, he's the goat.
He is the goat. He's the goat. And I've been reading so many books on him. The most recent one I read was is The Lone Samurai by William Scott Wilson. So William Scott Wilson, he is a translator of reading all these different samurai texts or Japanese texts on samurai culture. And there's so many stories that he kind of just shares with Musashi. Let me see if I can bring up some of the lessons that I wrote down. One of them on the top of my head is, okay, so he uses psychological warfare. I mean, this is just the first thing that comes to my mind. So psychological
Yeah.
warfare, as in whenever he has a duel in Japanese culture, like if you come late, it's like someone inviting you to dinner and you're taking a shit on their dining room floor. Like
Yeah.
it's so looked down upon if you're late. Yeah, like you have to be very punctual.
Oh yeah.
So what Musashi Miyamoto would do whenever he would have a duel is he would come late. He would purposely just take a nap and make the other person agitated, and then with that, like he when he's about to fight, he can see the agitation, and he knows like, oh, this person lost, like this guy lost control of himself. So he uses that method, and it reminds me of something Arnold Schwarzenegger would do whenever he would go into bodybuilding competitions. He would actually go to his competitor and he's like, oh, uh, you're looking a little flabby today. Like, did you get a little extra salt in? Did you drink too much water? Your legs are looking a little smaller than usual. Have you been working out your legs? And then he would tell like a story of, like those people he would make fun of. They'll be just staring at themselves in the mirror, kind of like looking uh worried, anxious. Like, and then he's using psychological warfare to his leverage.
Oh, you're remarking on the fact that he's not just using battle like intellects. He's actually going psychological. He's going around the box.
Yeah, he's just using whatever he can to help himself win. And he talks about how in martial arts, victory is the main objective. And he talks about how these other schools, they talk about, or they try to be like the flashy warrior, trying to show all these different moves. And they kind of forget, like, thinking about all that extra unnecessary fluff, it would make them lose. It'll make them die. Like, you want to stay grounded, you want to stay focused, you want to think about that one main objective, that simple, focusing on that simplicity. Does that make sense?
Right. He's looking at the objective as victory in and of itself, whereas there are many sword schools who focus on flash, who focus on tradition, who focus on these other things. For him, was correct me if I'm wrong. He was sort of like Bruce Lee in the sense that he sort of picked up many different styles, but he ultimately created his own style, right?
Dude, he's a definition of range.
There you go. He was actually the only samurai who mastered the two sword technique, right?
I don't know if he was the only one, but he was definitely one of the only ones who, yeah. I mean,
Yes.
did I just repeat myself?
No, no, he was one of the
He
only
wasn't the
ones.
only one, but he's one of the few. Okay,
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. You get what I mean.
Hmm. Wait, so I have a question. How did you sort of get involved with this admiration of samurai, David? Because we're both pretty hardcore about it. But how did you get sort of in this samurai, like starry eyed position as well?
My favorite game when I was a kid is something called Dynasty Warriors. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Did we ever talk about this?
No.
Okay, that dude, I played that game every day I play Dynasty Warriors 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the other expansions. I played Samurai Warriors, which is the same thing. It's like the same concept as Dynasty Warriors from the same company, but the lore is now on the samurais. So they have Samurais 1, 2, 3, 4, and I play all the expansions as well. So I've always been like fascinated with war and like strategy since I was a kid. And then from
Yeah.
there I kind of just dive deeper into like the individual characters. Like Musashi Miyamoto would pop out a lot, and in the game he'd be like, oh, Musashi Miyamoto appeared, like dun dun dun. I'm like, okay, who the hell is this guy? Like, why is he so popular? And then after reading more on him, he's like, oh shit, like he's considered to be the greatest swordsman of all time. And I'm like, okay, he's definitely the top dog. How is he different from anyone else? So I just read on him a little bit more, and then you kind of just learn more facts about this individual's character, and you're like, wow, like that's pretty badass. Like I didn't know he had a story like that. I didn't know this how he saw the world.
I see. So you're saying that your first impression of Miyamoto Musashi, one of the greatest samurai of all time, awesome philosopher, was through Dynasty. He was in Dynasty Warriors?
Well, Dynasty Warriors led to Samurai Warriors, and
Ah.
later on they'll have games where they mix the two worlds together. So yeah, he would pop up in a Dynasty Warriors type of reality as well.
Oh, that is so awesome. I love that. Oh my gosh.
Have you played it?
No, I've never played Dynasty Warriors or Samurai. I didn't have a console really growing up. I was a PC gamer, so
Oh darn, dude, you would have loved it.
probably.
Okay, real quick, just for our listeners, like I said, because I want to make it practical, I have my list up. So I want to just go over the lessons that I wrote down that I felt like that I've learned from Musashi Miyamoto, and I feel like are just powerful takeaways for other people as well. So the first one is the observing eye and the perceiving eye, and he talks about how, I think we talked about this before, Will. Like, for example, when there's rain, the observing eyes simply notice that it's water coming down. There's no need for us to make a judgment call that it's good or bad. It is what it is. So that is the observing eye. So that's helpful because a lot of us we judge things a little too quickly. Like, oh, like this is bad for my career, or that's gonna make me sick, or something like that. Like it's we judge things too quickly. So it kind of
Mm,
like how it grounds me. It's like, okay, wait, take a step back, David. Let's not judge the moment. We don't know how this is gonna play out. This can actually come into our favor or my favor. So that's lesson number
yeah.
one. The second lesson is he has a story. The lesson is called Attacking Problems One by One. And there's a story where he was grouping a fierce band of warriors. And how he conquered or defeated these warriors was like, okay, there's no point attacking all of them at once. He would fake run, and when he would run like towards, like, I guess, a narrow path and like an alleyway. So he forced the other soldiers trying to fight him to create a line. So therefore he's now fighting everyone one at a time, one by one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah, so he channels his focus on one thing at a time. Like that's kind of like the takeaway from that story. A third lesson I have is having hobbies. Now, Musashi Miyamoto, he's not just some killer. He's done many things. He's a painter. He partakes in calligraphy. He writes books. He's a philosopher. Like he's done many other things, and I feel like that's so important for any high achiever to immerse themselves in. Like Winston Churchill, he is this great orator. He's the prime minister of the UK. What's the hobby that kind of let him relax? It was laying bricks. Like it's boring as hell, but he laid bricks for hours to kind of calm himself. He would do that. He would paint. He would write. So he would have like a creative side. So I think a key to succeeding in life based off these examples is like you just gotta have a hobby like outside of your main craft.
Oh, totally.
That's number four is do something hard every day. He would practice something called zazen, which is like some intense Buddhist meditation. And there's like some chantings involved, or some breath work involved, and like he would do this strenuously every day. Like he was like drenched with sweat, practicing like these deep meditations, and he does it every single day. Like that's crazy. Like to do it every single day. I don't know. It's just something so admirable about that. And I'm pretty sure, like we do our like cold showers and exercises and all that every day. Like it can get harder days when we don't want to do it, but like we push through.
Oh yeah.
All right, I'm just gonna read through the rest of the lessons real quick. Number 5, I talked about this before. He finds the main objective. He has a quote: "The purpose of the martial arts in combat is victory, not the demonstration of beautiful or dazzling techniques." Number 6 is what I talked about before as well. He uses psychological warfare. Number 7, he repeats a mantra to himself. So he would going back to the idea of objective lens and the perceiving lens. To remind himself the objective lens, he would repeat the phrase, "You should investigate this thoroughly," because we forget. And I think mantras itself is a good way to kind of like ground ourselves. And lesson 8, I put down is the idea of betting on oneself. So, for example, I have this story that I wrote down in my blog after I read it in this book, The Lone Samurai. When Musashi was getting ready to go against an entire school, so one versus many, he stopped by a shrine to Hachimen, the god of war, to pray. And as he was about to shake the gong's cord to get the god's attention, he suddenly realized that, hold up, I never prayed and put faith in the gods and Buddhas before. Why am I doing this now? So that's when he was like, he had his revelation where it's like, no, I should, yes, respect the gods and Buddha, but I shouldn't be dependent on them. Like his victory, his path forward is solely dependent on him putting in the effort. That idea of just ownership, I felt like was very powerful. Well, do you have anything you want to like expand from that? Anything?
Yeah. So what's striking to me about Musashi is this such like self-confidence that he has. Just to be like literally praying and then in that moment being like, wait a second, like, no, I've always depended on myself. And just the fact that he thinks outside of the box in terms of how he approaches his duels, I think is also it speaks of his sort of confidence in his own ability, which I think was is probably one of the biggest qualities in making him, a winner because he wouldn't lose duels. Did he ever lose a duel? Do you remember, David?
I think he was undefeated, like 61 battles around there. And
Yeah.
yeah, because if you lose, you died, I think.
Oh
Right? I
yeah. Oh
think
yeah,
you got
that's right.
killed.
That's right. You were dead. So he was undefeated. Now I have an interesting question because um I've been a big fan of Musashi for a long time, and actually a couple years ago, I was dating a girl, and she was asking me about, what I liked about Musashi in particular. And I told her, I said, he was facing one of the leading swordsmen of all of Japan, named, I think, Sasuke Kojiro, in one of his final duels. And he was
Yeah.
late, like you said, he took a nap or whatever. And by the time he got there, Kojiro was so freaking pissed that he was basically tilted, as gamers would call themselves sometimes. You're kind of pissed, you're kind of mad,
Hmm.
you're not playing very well,
Yeah.
and so he wins a duel. But then my girlfriend asked, she said, "Wait, I thought samurai were supposed to be honorable." And I was like, "Yes, in the Bushido code, yes." And she goes, "But he was late. So wouldn't that be considered dishonorable?" And I didn't really know how to answer her. But David, how would you say honor and how it plays into what because I would say that's almost playing out of honor if you're late to a duel. But if the whole goal is victory, how would you sort of do you have any words on that?
Yeah, I mean that is a fascinating question. I love it. The way I kind of approach it is we all have different values. I mean values and as in like different in different order. So what is the main objective for Musashi Miyamoto is to win, is victory. And I want to kind of like clarify that battle with Kojiro wasn't his like one of his final ones. It was actually one of his earlier ones. Kojiro died when he was like 30-ish, and
Oh.
he was in roughly the same age with Musashi from what I remember.
Mm.
And yes, and that battle was really quick actually. It was like Kojiro like rushed at him, and he'll have this like famous move where he would try to do two slices. One slice is kind of like a fake, but then the second slice is the actual one. Or actually a better way to say it is you do a slice and then the reverse slice. the sword coming back to the scabbard, that's like that, like the final or the most damaging attack.
Yeah.
And because Musashi, he knew that Kojiro liked using the long sword, he did his game, he like made a game plan already. And he strategized like, okay, like this is the length of Kojiro's sword and whatnot. He tied like a headband and like the knot in like facing him, and he distanced himself like just perfectly. Where the first cut, it slashed the headband completely of Musashi Miyamoto, and then the second cut it just is cut his leg a little bit, like on his thigh. But from that misfire from Kojiro allowed Musashi to kill him in one strike. So that battle ended extremely quickly. But it's kind of like a side tangent. So going back to your main question, I feel like he definitely had different values, and I feel like in terms of honor, it's kind of like the idea of like you need to know the rules before you can break it. Do you get what I mean?
Go on.
Well, first we're in this world with these rules. We have these confined restrictions, or any game we play, and then that's how we learn, that's how we grow. And then from there, once we develop a certain skill point, I feel like we, or knowledge, let's say, I feel like we're able to kind of bend rules slightly. I don't know if it directly answers your question.
It's a hard
But
question,
yeah, I
dude.
mean, it
It's
is a
a hard.
tough one. It's
I
tough.
didn't really know.
Yeah.
It's a hard question. For me, I would say now that, like, yeah, I think following a code is great, but if at the end of the day you have a certain objective, Miyamoto Musashi was not afraid to do things his own way, which what I think is what makes him special. He was a samurai. Well, technically he was Ronin, right? He didn't have a master.
At that time, yes, he didn't have master.
Right, right. But he was following a series of insanely self-disciplined practices that I think are admirable and nonetheless reminiscent of the Bushido code, which is admirable.
Is there any other main lesson that you feel like you took away from the way samurais conduct themselves that you, I guess, implement or want to better implement or emulate in your life?
Well, what's great for me about how the samurai code of honor and respect and etiquette, the grounding sort of idea is respect. That is appreciation for nature, appreciation for your fellow man, appreciation for the way things are, and sort of conducting oneself in accordance and with the grain. Now, I understand in the time of samurai there was killing, which is sort of as a species we've sort of evolved out of, but I think what strikes me about Japan is that they took what was essentially a symptom of that kind of human barbarism, and they sort of wove it with their respect for nature and for each other. In a degree, of course, they still fought and dueled and destroyed each other, but there was a sense of reverence and a sense of respect in your opponent, and a sense of respect when you defeated them, and a sense of grace when you were defeated, and accepting if you were defeated.
Okay, we're gonna quickly go on to our second question, coming at us from Michael Craig. He asks, "What is Musashi's most important work? Book of Five Rings or Dokkodo?" I appreciate you sending that in, Michael. Thank you. So yeah, Book of Five Rings and Dokkodo, they're two books written by Musashi. Will, I don't know if you've gone over either of the books.
I've only read Five Rings.
Okay. Dokkodo is very short, is mainly a list of commandments. It's the book that he wrote right before he passed away, I think like a week before. Like he knew he was gonna die. So he went up to the mountains, he sat down, he opened up his scroll, and then like he wanted to impart like his last bit of wisdom in the world. And it's very similar to the Book of Five Rings. Let me see if I can just pull it up because it's so quick. It's 21 laws, and I'll just list a couple of them. Number six, do not regret what you have done. Number seven, never be jealous. So these are all just like pretty solid quotes to kind of like revisit from time to time. But yeah, they're basically just commandments. But Book of Five Rings overall, it's more widely read and more widely known. So I think that book in general, it has more of an impact towards people.
So, which book would you say is more the most impactful for you?
I'd say Book of Five Rings. Yeah, just because I feel like it was just more in depth. It was more colorful to kind of read. If Musashi Miyamoto were to live in today's day and age, what do you think he'd be like? I'm curious.
I think he would be an entrepreneur, and he wouldn't follow a lot of like the basic like, no, this is how this business is supposed to work. He'd go his own way and find his own way to do it, even if it. I'm not saying he would resort to like insider training, insider trading, that kind of his own way. But I think he'd be. I think there's so much distractions, quote unquote, of today of people sort of chasing things that aren't aligned with their own values for the sake of, let's say, pleasure, short term pleasure, which is exactly what he's writing about. So I think
Mm.
he'd find himself very at odds and ends, but probably very successful in that respect because a lot of people are mesmerized by things that I think might detract them from their path or their, if they'd serve as competition in a business that he'd find himself in. How do you think Musashi would fare in today's modern climate?
I'd say he'd be a full-on artist, like let's say a singer or a fighter or a craftsman for sure. And similarly to what he pursued before, he would, I think, very much leverage technology that we have today, but in a healthy way. So for example, no, because he knows how to conquer his mind in a way. So when he uses social media, it's not to the point where it's like, he's criticizing himself because he's comparing himself. It's more so like, this is inspiration. Like, oh, I didn't know you can do this like that. And like he's just getting more and more hyped as he's seeing other people's success because he sees that as fuel for his own success. And I guess an example I can give in modern time is someone like Jay Shetty. Do you know who he is?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's for those who don't know, Jay Shetty is this social media entrepreneur, and he was a monk. And I feel like that skill of being a monk helped him kind of thrive in this new space of marketing and business because I mean, being in this space of like constantly being immersed with all these different people around the world, I feel like it's a lot easier. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's definitely easier, I'd say, for him to kind of crowd out the noise, like the negative voices in one's head in terms like, oh, I'm not good enough, but more so like, oh, like I'm focusing on what I can provide to the world and whatever success I see from other people, that's something that I can celebrate for as well.
Yeah, I like how you're bringing attention to the fact that he would be in the same cacophony, cacophony. How do you say that word? He'd be in this orchestra of music of information flying at his face, but he would filter it through what he would find useful. Whereas I feel like us being raised in this generation, sometimes we're overtaken by these comparison game type, sensationalized titles type things. But I think having a very level-headed mind, and like you say, the objective mind and the subjective mind, or is it the eye? Um,
Perceiving eye and objective eye.
Thank you. The perceiving eye and the objective eye. Having the perceiving eye to take everything that is ultimately can be objective for you and using it in a way that will serve you the most. I think that's what it's all about. And what he would definitely demonstrate. And I agree with you. He would definitely be like that.
Musashi Miyamoto, or
Wait, I have a question to backtrack real quick.
yeah.
You mentioned the idea of negative visualization, and I understand that's a practice in Stoicism as well. Can you go further into like what negative visualization is and how it might serve one?
Sure. So negative visualization is the act of going through all the worst case scenarios. And a lot of people, they avoid that because they feel like they're going to manifest that. However, that's not the case. People who practice stoicism, they practice negative visualization. They practice like, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? And they're I guess they're just reminding themselves like that can happen. They're not gonna say that they're not saying it is gonna happen, but they're just preparing themselves. So when it does happen, it's kind of less inflicted.
Softens the blow.
It softens the blow. Yeah, it's kind of akin to lowering one's expectations. So instead of like you hyping me up, like, oh, David, this burger at this new restaurant, it's so amazing. Like if you're hyping me up like that, I'm gonna be like, oh shit, like it must be really damn good. And then if I go there and if it's not as amazing that I think it is, then even though it is good, I'm gonna feel a little like, oh, it wasn't that great.
Okay. I'm just so curious because I've never practiced like negative visualization. Have you found it quite useful for you in your practices?
Oh, I find it so helpful. Any time I'm in a new scenario where like I am doing something big, like I'm doing a collaboration with someone, or let's say I have this new project, or let's say I'm starting the podcast. I remind myself that things like technical difficulties and certain guests not willing to record or respond, those are all scenarios that can happen. And when they do happen, like I'm not phased by it as much as I think I would have been if I didn't kind of like go through that mental thought process.
Because this is something that's sort of like new for me. So I was like, oh, negative visualizations. What is this all about?
All right, guys. So we're going to wrap it up here. And we want to kind of share what we think are good book recommendations if anyone's interested in diving deeper into this topic. In terms of the lore or the story of Musashi Miyamoto himself, there's a great novel called Musashi, and it's a very thick book. It's like 1,000 pages, and I think the author goes by the name Eiji Yoshikawa. So that's something that someone can look up. The one I just finished, like I said, is called The Lone Samurai by William Scott Wilson. There's a lot of not a lot, but there are some stories on Musashi that comes out from certain authors like Ryan Holiday and Robert Greene. So if you're interested, or if you've heard of The Obstacles the Way, 48 Laws of Power, 33 Strategies of War, Musashi Miyamoto will pop up there as well. Or if you overall like the concept or want to learn more about like strategy and kind of like human nature in that sense, in terms of like status and power, I feel like those books are just fascinating to dive deeper into as well. Will, do you have any other book recommendations?
I like the book Hagakure. I don't think it's by a specific author, or maybe it was compiled by someone for sure. But Hagakure sort of outlines a lot of the codes of samurai through stories that have been collected over in medieval Japan. So, would definitely recommend if you're interested in the philosophy of samurai.
Yeah, and I feel like there's still a lot of touch points on samurais and the overall Japanese culture that we haven't dived into yet. And I feel like that's very helpful for anyone to kind of cultivate this terms of sharpening one's own craft. So we'll definitely make an effort to create another episode where we kind of dive deeper into that. So let us know what you guys think. If you guys want to see a part two of us covering through that.
Let us know if you have questions about samurai, especially.
Yeah, definitely. Any review as well, either good or bad, that'd be much appreciated. And yeah, we're gonna finish it up here. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.
Peace out.